certain pleasure. Welcome to Back to the Father, a show about the journey of life focused on our final end, which is God Himself, our loving Father. And now, here's your host, Dave Palmer.
And good afternoon, and welcome everybody to Back to the Father, a production of the Guadalupe Radio Network. And we are streaming live on 4 social media platforms this afternoon. We are on Twitter, otherwise known as X. We are on YouTube, we are on Facebook, and we are on Instagram. And we are so thankful that you are watching us, whether you're watching us right now live or watching the recorded show. We've got a really interesting topic today that you may not be familiar with. We talk on this program about primarily the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas and the Summa Theologia. That's my passion. That's what I feel called to teach, and I do it primarily to high school students. I teach in studio for high school students, and I also teach online at something called Homeschool Connections. And so we are, okay, Joe has come into the studio, so okay, there we go. We had a microphone blocking my view. All right. So anyway, so today we are not going to be talking specifically about the Summa Theologia or anything directly related to the Summa, but what I want to do is introduce you to a philosophy called Utilitarianism. And utilitarianism is really interesting because when you hear what it is, your first instinct will probably be to say, well, that sounds great. So what's wrong with that? This is a really interesting type of philosophy. Doesn't sound like there'd be any problems with it. It sounds pretty simple. But during the course of this show, I'm going to teach you why utilitarianism has been really cautioned against by many popes and theologians of the Catholic Church, and why it's very problematic but also very common in our culture today. So that is the goal. And so if you are watching us also, this is very much an interactive type of program. So if you are watching and you would like to comment, regardless of which of the YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook you're on, Joe will be watching the comments, and he'll jump in anytime he sees a comment on any of those pages. So again, you're not bugging us or interrupting the program if you do have a comment or a question, because we very much would love to hear what you have to say. So anyways, thank you again for joining us. And Joe, I don't know how much philosophical background you have, or if you have any at all, but have you ever taken a philosophy class?
I took a philosophy class when I was, I think, 14 or 15. It was at my church.
Oh,
and
really?
It was like the like Apologetics 101, and some like the basic theories of it and everything like that. And of course, I thought I was the smartest guy after taking.
Wait, which parish was that?
It was up in Sanger, Texas. It was a Latin Mass church.
Oh, okay. So they were teaching philosophy. That's
it was someone who was a seminarian,
Yeah.
And then it wasn't for him. And then he came down to the church and kind of was helping some of the younger guys there, and it was kind of that class.
Okay. Did you enjoy it?
I enjoyed it. You just I don't know if it was exactly for me. Sometimes I feel like if I get too much knowledge, I try to think I'm the smartest guy in the room, and I am not.
Well, maybe you are. So do you remember any of it?
No, the only thing I really remember was the basics on how to prove that God existed.
Oh, okay. St. Thomas Aquinas.
Yes.
Okay, so that's good. If anything stuck, it's probably a good thing to stick. So, all right. So, if you're out there and you want to comment on whether or not you have ever heard of utilitarianism and what it's all about, that's going to be the focus on the program today. And so, I have a slideshow presentation. Remember last week I had a slideshow prepared, but we weren't able to put it on. And by the way, I also should mention that typically Cecil Anderson would be on the program. She may be watching from Hawaii, but she's on vacation this week in Hawaii, so I hope she's not. I hope she's like on the beach or doing something really fun and not watching her screen on Back to the Father. But we do hope that she's having a great time, and we do expect her, God willing, to come back next week, and we will have a program next week, and I think the following week after that as well. And then I'm going to take a couple of weeks off to go to Ireland. So I think at the end of May and the first week of June, we won't have a show, but that doesn't always mean there isn't a Back to the Father, because there have been some weeks when Sissel and William Kirkendall, who was our high school intern, they would take a stab at teaching something about St. Thomas Aquinas, and they actually did quite well and had a lot of feedback, and it was actually quite a good show. And so, all right, so on the second slide here, you will see the pictures of the two primary utilitarian philosophers. And you'll see they lived anywhere from the middle of the 18th century all the way towards the end of the 19th century. And their names are Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. And these two guys, Jeremy Bentham is the founder of utilitarianism, and John Stuart Mill is really the one who popularized it even more so than Jeremy Bentham. In fact, John Stuart Mill wrote a book called Utilitarianism, and he is arguably the most famous English philosopher of the 19th century. Okay, there were a lot of 19th century philosophers, including guys like Nietzsche, and even I think Hegel. I think he crossed over into the 19th century, I believe. Maybe not. I think maybe Hegel was more 18th century. But so these are the two guys. And anytime you look at philosophers, you want to also kind of put it in some kind of historical perspective of like what did they live during? What was going on? And I don't know if you're a history fan or not, Joe, but you look at these like 1748 to, let's say, 1873. What would be the most significant world events, the things that are going on during that period? Anything come to mind?
I would definitely French Revolution.
Yeah, there you go.
And I think the founding of America as well. So but I don't know if that would consider.
Yeah, 1776. Now, founding of the United States, right? Yeah, the Americas would have been much earlier than that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, so you had the American Revolution, which was, I guess 1776 was the independence, and then you had the French Revolution, which was 1789. I think theirs actually came a little bit later, and then you had the Reign of Terror. So these guys are living in England, but of course what's going on over in France is going to certainly reverberate across the entire world. And so also one of the significant things that's happening during this time period, you'd have the American Civil War, 1860 to 65 approximately. And so they would have been aware of that, but of course Bentham would have already been dead. But John Stuart Mill at the end of his life would have been aware of the American Civil War. And also the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so these are things that are going on. And also famous philosophers, Immanuel Kant would have been a contemporary of like Jeremy Bentham. Friedrich Nietzsche would have been a contemporary of John Stuart Mill. And so, nobody lives in a vacuum, and you have to really understand who else is influencing the world at the same time. And also, it might be interesting for you to know that John Stuart Mill was Jeremy Bentham's godson, because Jeremy Bentham's like best friend was James Mill, who was John Stuart Mill's father. And so these two guys were very, very intertwined. It's almost like Bentham would have been like his uncle. He wasn't a blood relative, but that's the kind of relationship. He would have been around all the time. And so these guys were very, very much connected. They knew each other very well. So what I'm going to do now, and again, if you are watching and you want to comment, regardless of which of the pages you're on, it looks like it may be Twitter, X, that's getting the most views right now. But if you want to comment, you certainly can. Just leave a comment underneath on the page, and we'll be happy to acknowledge your comment. And just let me know what you think about utilitarianism once I have a chance to kind of explain it. Okay, so the next page kind of lays out Jeremy Bentham as the father of utilitarianism, and he had what was called the greatest happiness principle. All right, and that says that individual happiness consists in achieving the greatest pleasure and the avoidance of the greatest pain for the greatest number of people. Okay, so I mean, on the surface of it, you'd say, what's wrong with that? I mean, that sounds pretty cool, okay? So our happiness would mean the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest amount of people and the least pain for the least amount of people, okay? So, okay, all right. Do whatever promotes the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people and minimizes the most pain. And then this is a direct quote from Jeremy Bentham. He says, nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. They govern us in all we do, in all that we say, in all that we think. Okay, so he was influenced by the Greek philosopher Epicurus, who said that the main goal of life is to pursue pleasure. And also Thomas Hobbes, who was a political philosopher. He believed a strong leader was necessary for the benefit of the whole rather than individual rights. Okay, so Thomas Hobbes really believed in kind of setting up a authoritarian dictator, a single man who had total control over the populace, in order that it would at least be safe. Okay, and people would have their safety. They wouldn't have to worry about crime because you got this authoritarian leader. Okay, so greatest pleasure for the greatest number of people. So these are a couple of the influences on a guy like Jeremy Bentham. So now the question is, do you see any possible problems with utilitarianism? Greatest pleasure, most amount of people, the least pain for the least people. What could go wrong, right? As your dad
sounds great on paper, doesn't it? I mean, it's
on paper.
You
yes.
want the best for everybody with the least pain. I mean, it sounds great, right?
Okay. Could you possibly see any problems with this?
Definitely can be taken in a way that would cause many problems.
Okay, so you can see this.
Yes.
All right, okay. So you don't have to be like a great philosopher. You don't have to be St. Thomas Aquinas to see. And also, where this quote of his where he says, basically, we are governed by our pleasures and our pain. Okay, imagine if Joe and I are governed by the desire for pleasure. Okay, as a married man and an engaged man, you can see where that might be problematic. Okay, that might be problematic, and quite frankly, it'd be give me a lot of pleasure to just go off right now and drink 4 or 5 beers. And it wouldn't probably be the smartest thing for me to do, but it would give me pleasure. And it probably wouldn't hurt anybody. I mean, as long as I'm not driving, right? But when I get my work done, so there's the absolute pursuit of pleasure and pain can certainly be pretty problematic. Okay, so the next slide here, Jeremy Bentham went so far as to create what he called a philosophic calculator. So he said that when you're making decisions, and you're not quite sure if the decision is the right thing to do, he said, have a piece of paper with 2 ledgers, and on one side, write down all the things, the pleasure that it would bring you, and other people as well. And on the other side, list all of the pain that could possibly result from this decision. And then you give like point values to the pleasure and the pain. You add it up, and if there's more pleasure than there is pain, well, Jeremy Bentham would say that this is probably a good thing to do. Okay, so go for it. Okay, as long as there's any, the pleasure and the pain. He said all pleasures are of equal value, so he didn't really think that intellectual pleasures were more important than physical pleasures. They're all pretty much in the same plane, right? So that's what he did. Okay. I don't know if he had an actual apparatus or if it was just like writing it on paper, but he had this, philosophic calculator, and, that's what he proposed. Okay. It's kind of an interesting thing. All right. So the next slide here, talks about his most famous book, Introducing Utilitarianism on the World. Was called Introduction to the Principles of Morals and Legislation. Now, the title of that book should immediately raise some alarm bells for you, because he now is introducing law, okay, legislation. So he and Mill were both not content with this utilitarianism to be strictly for personal decisions. He wanted to influence law. He wanted to influence the culture, and quite frankly, he has and had back then a huge impact on law and the way the culture has gone since the time that they lived, and we'll talk about some of that in just a minute, okay? He says legislation should promote the greatest happiness to the greatest number of people and produce harmony between the interests of society as a whole and those of private individuals. Moral education should appeal to enlightened self-interest, When others feel pleasure, I maximize my own pleasure. All right. So, okay. So we've got 2 more slides with Bentham. So now in this next one, we'll get into some of the problems, and I'll give you some concrete examples of this in a moment. Okay. So the biggest problem is it creates a subjugation of individuals for the good of the majority with the greatest happiness principle. Okay. So if you want the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest amount of people, well, sometimes some individual people may need to take the fall for that. Okay. There's a very kind of a story, and it's a little bit perhaps unrealistic, but it says that if there was it's not too unrealistic, but if there was a killer on the loose in a small town, right, and somebody got killed, and the word gets around that the guy hasn't been caught, he's still on the loose, and the town goes into a frenzy, okay, and everybody's unsettled, nobody's going to work, nobody's going to the grocery store, nobody's taking their kids to school, so the whole city is in a complete tizzy. So the town organizers come together with an idea, and this is a very utilitarian idea, and they say, why don't we take some guy out of the prison and take him out into the town square and say, we found our killer, okay, and we're gonna strap him up and hang him in the middle of the town square, and he takes the fall. But what would the result be? Is that the town would then be relaxed and relieved because the killer has been found. Now, it doesn't really matter that's not the real killer, right? But they at least go back to work, and they go back to school, and they go back to the grocery stores. Why? Because the greatest good was achieved by taking this poor guy and hanging him up in the town square, because at least temporarily, hopefully that other guy doesn't resurface, because that'd make us look kind of bad, but that would be utilitarian, okay? Greatest good for the greatest amount of people, okay? So does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Yeah.
Great analogy.
Yeah, another one that you could say would be, and I see these like on YouTube videos and all that, but somebody happens upon in the jungle of South America, and 10 people have been captured. And there's one person who says, I'm going to kill all 10 of these people. Did we talk about this last week? I don't think we did. But
I don't think we did.
Okay, so he says, I'm going to kill. Okay, Joe, you happen upon this situation, okay? He's got 10 people lined up, and he said, I'm going to kill them all. But then he says, Joe, I'll give you the gun, and if you kill one of them, I'll spare the other 9. Okay, but you've got to kill one. You can pick any one you want, okay? But if you kill one, I'll spare the other 9. And if you don't kill the one, I'm going to kill all 10. Okay? So you're in a bind.
The choice is hard to... It's not hard to make there from a moral standpoint, but from a utilitarian, just looking at it from that perspective, you would say, well, I want to save 9 people instead of 0, so I will kill 1.
So you're going to kill 1.
That would be the utilitarian.
That would be an inherently evil act that you would do in order for a utilitarian end that 9 of these people are going to live. Okay, that's an extreme example. Probably never happens, but it's Sissel mentioned one I think last week where you're on a train and it's on a track. And it's a very similar situation. In fact, it's almost identical. Okay, the train is heading towards, let's say 5 people on the track, and you have an opportunity to divert the train, and where they're on the other track, there's only 1 person. Okay, so if you divert the train from where it's already going, you're just going to kill 1 person. But then if it just keeps on going, you didn't ask for this. This is just the way the train's going. You're going to kill 5. Okay, would you do it? Okay, very similar situation. But then that 1 person's death would be on you, whereas the 5 aren't, because
it's through no fault of your own. You can do your best to help, but a moral standpoint, you cannot make that decision.
Yeah, so anyways, I don't know if anybody is out there watching this or paying attention. If you are watching this on any of the platforms and you want to comment on utilitarianism so far and what we've and what we are talking about, by all means, comment and let us know. I just got a text from somebody saying, "Do you have a show today?" Yes, there's a show today.
It's Back to the Father.
It's Back to the Father. Okay, so all right, so here is okay. The last slide on Jeremy Bentham is kind of on his legacy, his influence. He was a big influence on his godson, John Stuart Mill, who we're talking about in a moment. Later moralists argued that morality of an action is dependent on how much pleasure it produces. He influenced something called consequentialism. What makes an action right or wrong are its effects, okay? Its effects. Missing from the utilitarian ethics, and this is very important, is doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do, okay? So from a Christian ethical standpoint, we don't do the right thing in order that the consequences you please the most people. We do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, all right? And also, utilitarianism doesn't acknowledge that there is even a right thing to do because it's always based on consequences. So there are no right actions, there are no wrong actions. The only thing that makes an action right or wrong is the consequences. Okay, so inherently there are no right or wrong actions, okay? And also the dignity and intrinsic rights of the individual person are compromised in this thing. So, okay, so the next slide gives you a few of examples. Okay, so let's say you see this girl on the left, and she just got a positive pregnancy test. Okay, and this girl is going to be the valedictorian of her high school. She's been accepted into Harvard, and she is brilliant. In fact, her goal is to find the cure for cancer. Okay, and people are like, you're smart enough, you can do this, okay? But by golly, now she's got this baby, okay? This baby is really going to complicate things, and so people say, well, maybe the best thing to do would be to abort the baby. Because think of all the good that is going to come, even if you put the baby up for adoption. I mean, it's you know, are you still going to be able to finish your high school? And you know, and certainly if you carry the baby, that's going to really complicate things when you get to college. And you know, maybe this baby, the baby gets aborted, but think of all the good, all the consequences that would come from this. Okay, that's a utilitarian question. A lot of people would say, well, gosh, you know, think of all the good that would come out of it if she just had that abortion. But the Christian ethics would say you can't do something evil, and even if good is going to come from it, okay? Classic example is something like, you know, if Hitler's mother had an opportunity to abort him, should she have, if she knew what was going to come from his life, right?
Yeah.
And I think most people would probably say, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great idea. It saves millions of people. Everything is good at that point.
Yeah, yeah, and even from a logical standpoint, it doesn't necessarily mean that, because it doesn't mean that somebody else may not have risen up and did the exact same thing as Hitler. So you just don't know. Mm-hmm. But I think it probably would be safe to say that there would be some good consequences had Hitler been aborted. A utilitarian would say, well, therefore, you know, you get that philosophic calculator.
Should have done that.
Should have done it. I mean, of course, that's a hypothetical because his mom would have never known. But Christian ethics would say, no, you can't do that. Okay, I know it sounds horrible. You can't commit an evil act like abortion in order that there would be good consequences. And then Maximilian Kolbe, okay, top right there in this picture, and I think this is a real life situation that many people face. You know, you have an ailing grandmother or parent who gets diagnosed with something like, dementia or Alzheimer's, and you're thinking, okay, this is a long haul, and there's a lot of money that's going to go into keeping her quality of life is very bad.
There's no cure for the disease. At some point, people are like, well, it's just better.
Yeah, and it's and maybe even she wants it. Okay, and so euthanasia becomes something that might be an option. It's going to cost a lot of money. That money could be used to support something else or given to a charity if we just euthanize her, because this is going to maybe go on for 10 or 15 years, and she's just going to be at home. She's not even going to know who we are. Okay, that's a tough call, but the utilitarian would certainly say, yeah, euthanizer.
And no questions asked from a utilitarian standpoint.
Oh, no doubt about it. Okay, so but from a Christian ethical standpoint, you can't do evil in order that a good comes from it. Okay, and then Maximilian Kolbe, I put him on there because he actually was in a situation in that at Auschwitz where they were decimating, which literally means killing every 10 person. And then he offered to give his life for a married man. But what if the opposite had happened, the scenario that I said a moment ago, if they had said, okay, Maximilian Kolbe, I'll let all these Jews free for the rest of their life if you just kill one person. Okay. And I'm pretty certain Maximilian Kolbe, knowing Christian ethics quite well, would have said, I can't do that. I can't do that. So you see why utilitarianism is attractive. You see it's quite simple. It sounds good, but it's quite problematic in many ways for the reasons that we are explaining right here, okay? All right, so let's move on to our friend John Stuart Mill. And on this slide, it says, best-known English-speaking philosopher of the 19th century. His father was a close friend with Jeremy Bentham, as already mentioned, and he wrote 2 books. One is called Utilitarianism, and one is called On Liberty. And what he did in utilitarianism, other than take Bentham's idea and write a book about it, is that he expanded on Bentham's idea of utilitarianism, adding qualitative aspects to pleasure rather than just quantitative. So it wasn't just the number of pleasurable acts, but it also was the quality of them. The intellectual pleasures are better than the physical pleasures, for example, okay? So on the next page, his book on liberty, he talked about individuals pursuing their own aims is among the essentials of human well-being and the greatest good. Okay, and his moral philosophy has had a huge impact on the world today for reasons that we'll explain here in just a moment. He said, with regarding to curbing government's power over the individual, the only purpose for which power can rightfully be exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm from others. People should be able to do what they like, even at the risk of harming themselves, so long as they do no harm to others. This will create the greatest degree of happiness among a community. Okay, he is a big influence on libertarianism today, which basically says, government, get out of my face, get out of my life. Over one's own body and mind, the individual is sovereign. Okay, and that should definitely make you think of the mantra, my body, my choice, which is what the pro-choice, pro-abortion people say. And they also will say, oftentimes there are moral issues, and they'll say, well, it's not harming anybody. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I'll give you a couple of examples here in just a moment, okay? All right, so the last slide here with John Stuart Mill, he was a proponent of what's called radical liberalism. People should be free to do whatever they desire as long as they don't harm others, okay? Sodomy laws, gay marriage, okay? This is the argument that's used in these. He did not believe in natural law. Conformity to nature has no connection whatsoever with right and wrong. He influenced economics, people like John Maynard Keynes, and he was a nominalist and an empiricist. And he, right before he died, they asked him what he thought about death, and he said, it's the cessation of our consciousness when our earthly mechanism ceases to work. Okay, that was his way of explaining death. And so, all right, so John Stuart Mill, more of a focus on the individual, but where he took utilitarianism is that individuals should be allowed to do basically anything they want as long as they're not harming others. So, Joe Loney, can you see any problems in that philosophy?
Very much so. I think that one, it's kind of the next step of the philosophy, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the first one is, well, hey, you just got to just weigh all the choices, not so much on the individual as a group, as a whole. And then now it's, well, now you can't tell me what to do because it doesn't affect you. It doesn't hurt you.
Yeah, exactly.
I can do any drug I want in this room while you're away from there because it doesn't affect you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or, I think people definitely use that to justify pornography. Mm-hmm. if I'm sitting, if I'm sitting at a computer and I'm looking at pornography, how in the world does that affect anybody else? Okay, I mean that would be an argument. Okay, so pornography would be a utilitarian argument. Okay, this is my life; I can do what I want. Maybe on a lesser extreme, something like wearing seatbelts. Okay, I don't want to wear a seatbelt. Okay, and it doesn't affect anybody else's life, and so I'm going to do it myself. Suicide would be a big one as well. Okay, I can do what I want to do. Okay, whereas Christian ethics would say there's a right and a wrong, and this it's wrong to do it. Okay, suicide is very nuanced and it's obviously it's a very difficult topic, but it is intrinsically not good, right? Next slide shows a few things. Divorce, people might say, the greater good for the family is to get divorced. The greater good for society, and I think obviously divorce is also a very emotional topic, and there are some situations where a couple needs to separate, and there are certainly annulments. But I mean, when you have divorce rates that are so high these days, I think there is a certain utilitarian aspect to it as well. Gay marriage, certainly, people say all the time, what does it affect you if I want to love who I want to love, right? And then the transgender thing as well. But what in the world how does it impact, Joe, if I want to start considering myself a woman, how does that affect your life?
From a utilitarian standpoint, it has no effect on me.
Yeah.
Because you're completely separate. You decide on this qualitative, matters more to me, then it works for you and it wouldn't work. Yeah, that's kind of how that works.
Yeah, very relativistic, and everybody kind of do what they want to do and all that. So, all right. So the last thing I want to show is from a history of philosophy standpoint, how did utilitarian become a thing, right? Because it didn't just kind of grow out of a vacuum. And on this next slide, you'll see up on the top the Plato's allegory of a cave. And you see on the bottom 4 men from left to right. It's Plato, Aristotle, St. Augustine, and William of Ockham, okay? If I had more room, I would have put Aquinas in there. But just real quickly, and if you study the history of philosophy, you kind of understand this, is that Plato's cave, have you heard of the allegory of the cave with Plato?
I have never heard of the Plato's the cave, so I am learning right along with our audience.
Oh, is that right? Okay. Oh, well, good. All right. Then let me. We had a whole show about this one time, but let me explain it. Okay. So you see the picture, and you see on the left hand side there's a group of people that are in chains, right? Mm-hmm. And they're looking at a wall. And on that wall is being projected these kind of like puppeteer, puppet things. There's a fire, and that's providing the light. And so the point here that Plato is making is that the people in chains are not seeing reality. And what they're seeing are shadows, literally shadows, okay? And the reality is somewhere else, but they are only seeing shadows of reality. And then on the far right, it's kind of like a different frame, but one of these prisoners who was chained up looking at this wall escapes. Okay, he breaks from his chains and he runs out, and all of a sudden he sees reality and he sees what's going on, and also he goes out of the cave altogether and he goes out into the light. And for the first time, he is exposed to what's called the reality of things. All right. And all of a sudden his eyes open, and they're actually kind of, it's difficult at first because he's seeing reality for the first time. And then he runs back inside because he wants to educate his his fellow prisoners. But when he tells them that what they're seeing are shadows, they mock him and they threaten to kill him because they prefer the shadows. So what Plato is getting at here is he believed that the whole world that we see in the natural world is only shadows, and the reality of things is in another realm. Okay, so you see a dog. Plato would say you don't see the essence of a dog there. You see you see a shadow of a dog. You see a thing that's kind of like participating in the real dogness, but the real dogness is another realm altogether, okay? And that's not a great philosophy, but the point is that Plato identified that there is a greater reality beyond the physical, okay? So, and there's also, it has to do with this thing called universals, where if you see, 15 butterflies, they all share butterflyness, even though they're each individual butterflies. And so that, believe it or not, is a huge, huge issue in philosophy, okay? So the point is that Plato was a realist. He believed that there's really something behind what we can experience, okay? The next guy, Aristotle, came and he said, okay, Plato had this realm of forms and he had the shadows. And what Aristotle did was he brought it together and he said the forms are in the things. Okay, so now when we see a dog, we can actually have access to the form because that's what our intellect is able to come to know. Comes to know dogness because we saw a dog. Okay, it's not somewhere else in some other realm, right? And so then, so now the matter and the form are combined in the particular thing, right? So then Augustine says, well, okay, that form, yeah, it's in the thing, but originally it's not in this realm that Plato talked about. It's actually in God's mind. Okay, so God, all the forms, all the ideas of things originate in God, and then we go through our life and we are able to participate and come into contact with things, and everything that we see in the course of our life is telling us something about God. Okay, so Augustine just said that realm of forms that Plato was writing about, it's actually God, right? It's not just some random, abstract realm of forms, right? But then, okay, so that was Augustine's, one of his big contributions. William of Ockham lived about 100 years, well, he lived in the century after St. Thomas Aquinas, because St. Thomas Aquinas brought all this together and made this beautiful philosophy. But Ockham was a nominalist. And what that meant was that he didn't believe in real things. He believed that the only thing that we can see are the objects, okay? So he was like half of Plato, okay? There's no realm of forms, there's no universals, and we only see things, and then we give them names, okay? That's why it's called nominalism. It's that we give them names. So that's a dog, that looks like two, okay, that's a dog, oh, that's a tree, that's a bush, that's a butterfly, and but there's no reality. Okay, so there's nothing beyond the physical. Okay, and that had huge influences on future philosophers, all the way down to the utilitarians. Okay, so here's how it all ties together. Because take something like justice. Okay, justice would be something that Plato would have put in his realm of forms. There is an ideal justice, and so when we pay our taxes, that would be a particular instance representing justice. Okay, so there's the particular act, and then there's the realm of forms, the that what it represents. Okay, so there's an ideal. You stop somebody from shoplifting. Okay, that was an act of justice. Okay, but that act of justice is in line with all these other acts of justice because they participate in justice as a whole, right? So utilitarians, being nominalists, don't believe in the concept of justice, okay? There's no universal justice. There's no form of justice. And so being a nominalist, every single action is on its own, okay? So if there's nothing uniting all of the individual acts of love or justice or peace or what you name, then every single one has to be taken in isolation. And so they would say, wow, okay, there's no universals, so how am I going to take an individual act and determine whether it's good or bad? And that's where a guy like Jeremy Bentham says, because he doesn't believe in natural law, he doesn't believe that acts are inherently good or bad because they don't participate in anything above themselves. He'd say the only thing that I can think of would be the consequences. Okay. So I don't know if that made a lot of sense. I don't know if anybody is out there that's going to comment on this, or if I'm talking to strictly Joe Loney, which may be the case, which is all right.
Hey.
Okay. No pressure. You're the only student. Okay. But I know there will be some people that are going to watch this after the fact as well. Does that make sense?
It does. It seems some of these philosophers, especially later on, you can see where they build from another, but sometimes they'll take that turn away from it to kind of almost, I want to say, put their own spin on it, their own thought process behind it, and you kind of can taint something that looked good, that is good, and you can really change to a complete opposite of what the actual what it came from.
Yeah, that's exactly right, because it just continues to kind of spiral because people like me and people who are Thomists think that St. Thomas Aquinas put a really good system together, and then everything started to getting picked apart. Okay, beginning with somebody like William of Ockham, and then you had also like Rene Descartes, and I think therefore I am, and and it really now today everything is up for grabs. Everything, we don't quite know what's right and wrong, and is there a right, is there a wrong, but it got there through this slippery slope. And so if you can go back to the initial, go back, 750 years and learn a philosophy like St. Thomas Aquinas's and say, okay, this is what needs to be taught, because all these other ones are an aberration of St. Thomas Aquinas's kind of pure philosophy, if that makes sense. Okay. So, what's the point here? The point is that utilitarianism, for a culture that is not steeped in an understanding of the history of philosophy and also an understanding of their faith and of obedience to the Catholic Church, which would not support utilitarianism, but the Catholic Church rather would support objective truth, natural law. Natural law would say that we naturally know what's right and wrong. Okay, we naturally know that I don't shoot that person in the line because that's wrong. Even if 9 other lives will be saved, I naturally know I'm not supposed to do that. I naturally know I shouldn't have an abortion. I naturally know I shouldn't steal. I shouldn't commit adultery. Okay, these are the 10 commandments, and this is instilled in our heart. But if you throw away natural law, if you throw away universals, and if you throw away any kind of objective truth, well, you're left with, as Joe put it, a lot of people going in a lot of different directions and kind of making up stuff and filling the vacuum because you don't have that metaphysical system to fall back on. So you got to think of something else.
The foundation of it is not built on it's not solid.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly right. And we could go back and talk about, like I said, Rene Descartes, and you could talk about Spinoza and Leibniz and Hume, the radical empiricist, and Immanuel Kant, who was very, very problematic. And you can just see as you go through the history of philosophy how things just totally unraveled. And now you have existentialism, which we've talked about before, and utilitarianism, probably two of the most prominent philosophies that are influencing our culture today. So when people say like, oh gosh, I just can't believe it's so crazy out there today. I mean, how did it get to be so weird? And, men are calling themselves women and vice versa. And, boys want to be girls, girls, boys, and, whatever. People are, want to marry animals or trees. It's just, there's no, you put it so well, Joe, there's no foundation. It's just like everything's up for grabs, and it's getting kind of weird. So that's why in 1879, Pope Leo XIII wrote the encyclical Aeterni Patris, a restoration of Christian philosophy according to the mind of St. Thomas Aquinas. And he saw, even in 1879, that it was the train was kind of running off the tracks, and he felt the need to instruct the church in high schools and seminaries and universities to get back to a solid philosophy, go back, in the case of today, go back 750 years and see if maybe that philosophy didn't make more sense and more logical and more in line with reason. Okay, so that is the program for today. And I thank you all for watching. If you are watching this on a recorded basis after the fact, we do it live Mondays at 1 o'clock Central Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Time, and we always have a different topic. Next week, I've been asked to talk about the Blessed Virgin Mary, because this is May, this is the month of Mary.
It's the month of Mary.
And when I get on with Keith on Tuesday morning, we're going to talk about the Immaculate Conception and how St. Thomas Aquinas didn't quite get that one right, but the reasoning of why he got it wrong is interesting, and it might make a little more sense. But I'll be talking to Keith about that, and also about that and some other Marian issues on the next Back to the Father, which will be 1 week from today, which will be May 10th at 1 o'clock Central, 2 o'clock Eastern Time. And Joe, thank you very much for running the board. Thank you for your help and for participating and being a good sport.
It's very enlightening. Every time I come in my office and I turn on 1 o'clock, I like to hear you guys' on your guys' the programs and everything like that. I think it's very enlightening for all of us.
Well, thank you so much. Which is ironic because you say it's enlightening. The one of the periods of time that was instrumental in destroying Thomistic philosophy was the Enlightenment, which was basically the 17th and 18th centuries. The Enlightenment, but I know what you mean. So yeah, because there is a true kind of enlightening and epiphany that one can have when they come to learn something that they hadn't learned before. So hopefully that's the case with you. And we are going to go ahead and close down the show because we are not wedded to a particular clock because it's only on social media. But if you would like to get on our mailing list, if you would like to learn more about this program, or if you have suggestions for future topics, you can email us at backtothefather@grnonline.com. Backtothefather@grnonline.com. And again, please pray for Sissel. She is still in Hawaii and hopefully having a great time. And she, God willing, will be back to the show on the next Back to the Father. Okay? God bless you. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for joining us for Back to the Father. And don't forget, the glory of God is the human person fully alive. If you have comments about the show,